This episode of The Substance is brought to you by Chris Hotchkiss, American Family Insurance, and listeners like you. You've landed on The Substance, a podcast aimed at being biblical, thoughtful, and human. Join us each week as we engage the culture without the culture war. I'm your host, Trevor Aiken, joined here by my friends and my co-hosts, Philip Murnello.
Hey, everybody.
And Vincent Edwards.
What's going on?
What is up, fellas?
I'm excited.
How's the day going?
Oh, it's good, man.
I feel good, actually. I've been tired all week, but I feel good right now. I'm jazzed up.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Dude, same.
I hope I feel this way tomorrow. We got a two guest record week.
Yep.
The Substance is a Christian variety show. Every week we talk for about an hour about something or another of things in Christianity, culture, and the arts. At the end, we share some shout outs of things we or our guests have been finding enjoyable or edifying. So we're glad that you've joined us here for this episode. And if you're a returning listener to The Substance, welcome back.
Hey, welcome. And as you guys can see, we have a guest with us today, Cory Nathan. Cory's a podcaster. His internet bio says creative businessman. I'm sure we're going to get into that. And engaged citizen. Cory's a host of the Talkin Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other podcast. And we're very excited to have him on with us today. Welcome, Cory.
Thanks for having me, fellas. This is fun. I've been looking forward to it.
Heck yeah, us too.
Love to have you.
Glad to have you. I've listened to a few of your shows in preparation for this, and I think we're gonna have a really excellent conversation here. Before we get into the religion and the politics and all that, I'd love to hear part of your bio online and what you've talked about on the show is that Jewish background, converted to Christianity, and I don't know if I've heard the full story on that. I mean, you don't need to go super deep here. I'd love to talk to you about some more things, but how did that, well, first, I guess, how Jewish did you grow up and what was that, what was your religious environment like as a kid?
Very Jewish. So I wouldn't say that we were, some folks might think of, when they think of Orthodox Jews, they think of Hasidim. So we weren't Hasids. But I did go to an Orthodox synagogue, grew up going to Hebrew school for, from the time that I was in kindergarten until bar mitzvah. And then even after bar mitzvah, I went to Hebrew high school. In fact, my father was, Ronnie was he was one of the teachers. He's historian by training and obviously passionate about our own heritage. So we learned a lot. He remember that song, Adam Sandler wrote a song about all the different people who were Jewish.
Sure.
He must have gotten the inspiration from my father because we had this whole class where it was like Einstein and Freud and all these wonderful, influenced the world. And it was just all, everything important that's ever happened in the world, you could trace it back to a Jew. Sandy Koufax. I mean, come on. So we kept kosher. We observed Shabbos. We observed all the holidays. But as long as I was aware consciously, intellectually, I had big questions. I didn't just go through the motions at the services. I didn't speak ancient Hebrew, but I would read the English translations of whatever siddur we were praying out of. And I was fascinated by it. Later in my 20s, those questions became more, I don't know if burdensome is quite the right word, but certain questions were left not only unanswered, but completely unsatisfyingly gaping. I just couldn't make those connections.
Yeah.
So so by my late 20s, another series of events led me to this season of in-depth study. I was influenced by some mentors I really respected. There were business guys that I was doing some business with them, and I deferred to them because I wanted to. At that stage of life, you look for other mentorship. So I was looking. We didn't have kids yet. I was looking for advice on how to be a better husband, and once we did start having a family, how to be a better dad, and obviously, successful business person, active in a positive way in the community. and this one fellow, he always gave me books. He gave me tapes to listen to of great speakers. He gave me books, and every book he gave me was a Jesus book, which is cool. You know, like I was okay with it because I knew he was a Christian. But what bugged me about it was the dude grew up Jewish but became a Christian. So once I got to know him well enough, I was gonna take him to task over it. His name was Hal, and I was
just comfortable enough to confront him.
Yeah. Like you were one of my homies before, and now you're on the other team. Like, what's up?
You switched sides.
Yeah. It was like going from a Met fan to a Yankee fan. Like, you just what are you doing, man? So he, like he normally did, he gave me a book. The book was, you guys might know it. It was called More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell.
Yeah.
And I found it at the time. I found it entirely unpersuasive. So I thought.
Interesting.
Right.
It frankly, it just pissed me off that much more. But
this is why you switched. This
no. Yeah. No. He what the book did was it opened the door for that season of in-depth study, in-depth reflection, and just. It was the first time that I had been exposed to anything that tried to make an empirical case for the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I just didn't think that was possible. I never considered it. But when you take in the archaeological, the historical, the literary, all these different actual and pieces of empirical evidence, you have to at least consider it. And then once you consider that possibility, you have to then consider the theological framework of it. You know, so without going into, I've already gone into detail about it, but what really got me after reading a bunch of C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, and at the time I was already listening to Ravi Zacharias. This is another story, but he ultimately not only became, I not only read his books, and attended the seminars. Him and his family ultimately became a friend of mine because of how persuasive I found his particular approach to apologetics.
Yeah.
But again, that's probably a whole other conversation. But
Sure.
After reading all of this stuff, and by the way, trying to read the Jewish response to some of this stuff that I was reading, as well as re-examining other world religions and philosophies, after all this time of studying for months, at least a 6-month period of like this obsessive reading and reflection and habit and conversations with others, I still hadn't read the New Testament. So as Christians, not so surprising. The first book I read, Hal told me, read James first.
Okay.
As a Jew, it's like, it starts out like, hey, to the 12 tribes. I'm like, yeah, I'm from the lost tribe. So that's me. But it also, the book deals with questions that were left open for me. I felt that some of the stuff that I was reading didn't give a fair treatment to what Jews are concerned about. There's sort of this overly simplistic way of saying, oh, everything is about keeping the law and the legalism and but James is really interesting if you really dig into it. The faith versus works is really, to me, it's a fascinating contrast.
Yeah.
But then I just went to the beginning of the collection that we know as the New Testament. And in the 5th chapter of Matthew, Jesus begins what I thought of as the most brilliant Devar Torah, like explanation of Torah that I'd ever read or heard.
Wow.
Was the Sermon on the Mount new to you at that time?
I didn't recognize it as the Sermon on the Mount. I had heard the term Sermon on the Mount,
but I mean, was that the first
but
time
you didn't realize that's what you
it?
were reading.
Like, had you like cultural osmosis, or is that the first time you really engaged with it?
It was the first time I really engaged with it. And it's funny, there are phrases in there that I was familiar with from, I don't know, watching The Godfather and seeing certain, certain prayers I'm familiar with this. Or like, oh, did Jesus steal that from Spider-Man, or did Spider-Man steal that from Jesus?
Godfather, shout out to The Godfather, turns 50 this year, by the way.
I know, that's crazy.
I still need to see that.
Gonna get to see it in the theater. Hey, you might get to see it in the theater. 50th anniversary show.
Yeah, they're doing. Oh man, and they did like a whole. You got me off track, man. Are we going to talk about movies now?
You're going to be in a minute. Yeah.
So by the way, I got to tell you this. Getting a little, since we're talking about movies, I have this friend who's a very accomplished screenwriter, and his best genre is comedy. So he heard about this story of the Jew from Jersey becoming a Christian, and he wanted to write a comedy about, the Jew from Jersey becomes a Christian. But one of the things he needed to do was interview my father. And I said, I told him, hey, my friend, he writes comedy and he wants to write this funny movie about a Jew from Jersey who becomes a Christian. And he wants to interview you to get a little bit of background. My father goes, there's nothing funny about that. I said, Dad, that's actually what you just said is pretty funny.
That's pretty great, Dad. That's golden. That's
Right.
gold.
Yeah,
You primed up for it.
So anyway, sorry about the long rabbit trail here about how I became a Christian, but that was it. The Sermon on the Mount pulled me into the rest of the New Testament, went through Revelation 22, and
Wow.
I don't know if it was that night or the next night, but it was one of those 3 a.m. things where it was like, I got to do this thing. Yeah, I believe that Jesus was Messiah. I believe in this open universe and miracles happen, and he rose from the dead, and that was the central miracle, and all that stuff. And
Wow.
one of the crazy things was I didn't know how to do it because as Jews we have structured prayers for everything. And I just wasn't used to
know how to do the conversion prayer.
Yeah, like Baruch atah Adonai. I'm a Christian now. Like, what do you do? Like, so I wasn't used to the whole just talk to God kind of a thing. So it was kind of a stumbling, mumbling prayer, but it was a prayer nonetheless. And the next morning I woke up and we were in the car. I don't know where we were going, but I told Lisa that I prayed a prayer and talked to God, and I think I'm a Christian now. She grew up going to church. She's from Alabama. She's like, if you think I'm going to church with you every week, you got another thing coming. She just did not want to do it.
What was her religious status at that time?
She grew up going to church, but I don't think she identified her default posture. She just believed in Jesus. She believed, she thought of Jesus as God and all that stuff.
Very American. Yeah.
It just wasn't. It wasn't something that she consciously adopted herself. So, it later on, obviously, we raised our kids in the church, and they went to this Christian school, and that's a whole other conversation. I have some misgivings about all that, but so that's kind of how it happened.
Wow, man, what a journey.
Yeah, and then the second part, chapter 2, would be what happened when I told my parents and
I was going to say, how did that go over initially?
Oh, it was great. They were so happy for me, and
like you're just becoming your own person, and
we support
seriously,
you. It's all good.
If I went home and I said anything other than I'm a Christian, it would have gone better.
I could have told mom and dad.
Yeah, no, I could have told them I was gay. I could have told them I was if I said I was a Buddhist, they'd be like, oh, that's wonderful. Tell me more, Yeah. But I said I was a Christian, and my dad took it very clinically in a way. Like at first, we had like this 2-hour conversation. It was very, I don't know, he's being very analytical in the moment. A month later, he sent me the 10-page single-spaced letter outlining all of the reasons why I can't become a Christian from every angle you can imagine: historical, emotional, filial obligation, just everything. But my mother really does belong in the comedy movie. Her reaction was, she first, I just rolled out with it because I can't have 2-hour conversations with Phyllis. It's not one of those things you can do. So I just rolled out with it. Mom, I'm a Christian. And she acted like she didn't even hear me. So I'm like, Mom, I don't know if you heard me. I became a Christian. I'm a Christian now. And then she's like, fanning herself with her hand. She's like, I'm sorry. I just never thought I'd have a son who was, and she couldn't find the word. She goes, who was walking with Jesus? So, and then,
oh my goodness,
that's golden right there too, man.
She also, another thing she said that morning, she immediately also associated with being a Republican.
Wow.
Ronnie, our son is a born again Republican or something, So,
wow.
Yeah.
That is telling.
That is telling.
Yeah. So, that was, but that letter that my dad sent, that was the beginning of a 20-year conversation.
Wow.
I mean, it was intense for the first 3 years because I was trying to answer paragraph by paragraph and sentence by sentence, and he was responding to my responses to that. So it was this
deep,
deep engagement.
Yeah.
But I learned that staying in the conversation is 90% of the game.
Yes.
And I've also, I think I've evolved over time because I did have evangelical tendencies, but I think of my evangelicalism very differently now than I did then.
Yeah.
I thought of it much more akin to like a sale that you have to close.
Yeah.
Whereas now I think of it much more as a relationship that you're inviting someone into.
Yes.
Not just with me individually, but inviting them into a relationship with a body of people, the body of Christ.
Yes.
So anyway, sorry.
That's it.
No, that's a good word right there. Because it does. I mean, you go growing up, in the evangelical world too. It's like you go to the evangelical classes and like, how do you do evangelism? And it's very much like,
it's a pitch.
Okay, how do you get this pitch and all this kind of stuff?
Overcoming objections and leading them into your rhetorical like traps. Like that's what it is.
Yeah, but when you approach it that way, it's very, you lose the human behind. And I think when you have your family, that you're trying to interact with, it almost helps you break of it because you can't be that way. Like you will have this relationship. This is your dad, and this is your family who, for any listener who's in a similar situation, that's your family. And so you have to figure out, okay, how do I keep the conversation going and not shut it down?
Yeah, and that's a shout out to your dad, because I know that there are quite a few people that would be like, if they hear something that they don't like, they just shut the conversation down. They say, I don't want to be a part of it. So kudos to you for staying in that conversation and continuing to engage. But then also kudos to him, because he could have just been like, well, you're wrong and we're done.
And make no mistake, there were definitely a ton of moments just like that. But we found our way back to the conversation. And there were entire months, seasons that we just couldn't talk about it, but we kept on circling back to it because, his first reaction, he contemplated the possibility of sitting Shiva, from which, the ritual you go through when you're dead to me kind of a thing.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he contemplated that, but he did come to the conclusion that his relationship with me was more important than anything else. Whatever his religious convictions were, his relationship. So it's more, he gets just as much, if not more, of the credit, if there is credit, to stay in that conversation. But yeah, just when you do come to those, and again, my approach to it was admittedly much more contentious and transactional in a way, as if I could convince someone to change their entire worldview in one conversation. If I had that magic saying or phrase or something, or if I prayed hard enough that they would just, I guess I should be a Christian.
That's right. We came to Christ.
Yeah.
People think about that like, oh, I need to get this right. But that's not how any of us came to Christ. Like you talked about your many books over several years, and you're reading through the whole and
the relationship and community he was looking for, right? And
exactly.
You're looking for a mentor and looking, all those things.
Conversion doesn't happen like in an instant unless you're like you can't engineer a Damascus Road experience for somebody else.
Yeah, and that's this kind of contrast has been occurring to me again and again over the last couple of years, that if you emphasize the transactional, you might be missing the relational, and the relational is where the stickiness is, where you can plant deeper roots. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas if it's just transactional, if you can convince somebody in one conversation to make that big of a revelation, a personal revelation, and somebody else might come along. It's the parable of the sower of the seeds. How shallow are those seeds planted if somebody can come to that revelation just like that?
It's true.
So I don't know. It's in the relational, or maybe it's through a combination of relational, scripture, other revelation, creation. It really, we don't know how God works, but I know transactional is cheap, man. So
Yeah, it really reminds me of it speaks to the testimony of, and I say this with strictly speaking to your experience about deconstruction, because if you're thinking about it, you're on the Jewish side, you deconstructed your faith and you came to the faith of Christianity. And so there are people who are deconstructing in that sense, and they are coming to Christ. And so it shows a different vantage point of what that experience could be, and the time it takes. And I think you hit the nail on the head that oftentimes we just try to fix people.
yeah,
If you're saying I'm questioning things, I'm analyzing things, I'm trying to figure things out, it's like, no, you're lacking faith. You just need to pray, read your Bible, go to church, and stop with the questions. And so the humanity's lost almost. And so
yeah,
people don't stay and labor in those conversations and keep it going, and continue to love and keep that conversation open. It's more like, well, okay, you're looking to abandon the faith. Well, you are excommunicated. And so I think that's just such a beautiful example of how we as believers ought to handle individuals who are questioning and researching and digging in, and removing the time frame from it, thinking that, if I just say, like you said, say this one saying, say this one phrase, say this one sentence, and they'll come right back or whatever. But it's like, that is not always the case, and for most times it's not the case. It's
yeah.
going to take time. And so we should embrace the fact that it does, and say, in this time that God gives me to be in relationship with this person, how do I still love them and honor them and encourage them in the faith? So I think that's
Right.
just a beautiful testimony in that regard.
Yeah, and I find questions to be a gift. In fact,
Yeah.
I find that questions that I don't know the answer to be an even bigger gift, because it gives
Yeah.
me the opportunity to say, I don't know, that's a really good question. Could I get back to you on that? And then you get another opportunity, unless they say, no, I'm just not interested. Okay, whatever, so,
Mm-hmm.
live and learn. But most people are like, yeah, let's talk about it again. So it's like climbing up a ladder, and the ladder is climbing up to a richer and richer relationship with this person. So if you're closing for anything, you're just booking another meeting with them, booking another conversation with them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not afraid to look like, hey, I'm not the authority. The other thing too is that we have a really good example of questions and how questions were answered, and that's Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus often answered a question with another question,
That's right.
partly
Yeah.
to open up the assumptions of the question asker.
Yep.
He
Mhm.
asks, why do you call me good? That's a talk about the conversation that can happen if you have to then question, why are you calling me good? Right.
Mm.
Or again, I think a lot of folks maybe misread a lot of the interactions that Jesus had, in particular with the Pharisees. Now, his interactions with the Sadducees and the priests might be one thing, but a lot of his interactions with the Pharisees were different. And to me, when I was first reading it, and to this day reading it, I saw what looked like the conversations that were recorded later, or they were in the process of being recorded then, 200 years before and 200 years after what became the Talmud. These are conversations that rabbis and students of Torah were having among each other.
Mhm.
And it sounded like that. Sometimes it sounded very, very argumentative. Sometimes it sounds very academic and erudite and scholarly. And sometimes passions were raised.
Mhm.
And for me, it wasn't. I forget the word that you used, Vince. What did you call it? Deconstruction.
Deconstructing, yeah.
In conversations with my father, he was under that assumption as well. How do you leave behind everything that you grew up with and everything that you learned? And I couldn't immediately articulate that wasn't it for me. It was more of a completion.
Yeah.
It
The
was,
fulfillment. That was that was
Mm.
Jesus's whole, like, he came to fulfill the law.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's what
Lit-
it was.
But you didn't feel like you were tearing anything down. You felt like you were always on this path.
I was moving, on a path, and it wasn't until I started reading N.T. Wright stuff Tom Wright.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
That I could sort of reimagine myself in first century Israel, having a very similar conversation with my father in first century Israel. Like, hey, Dad, I met this guy, Yeshua, and he's Joseph's son. Joseph, but he's answering things in a very different way. And what he's doing and the stories that he's telling are resonate with everything that we've been studying in Torah. And the healings are going against what the priests want, because he's welcoming people back into our people, the people of God, the people of Israel, that somehow the priests and the Sadducees want to keep our classes. But this Jesus guy, he's making all of us one. And maybe I wouldn't have even understood it that way. But when I started reading N.T. Wright, and there were some other scholars that I was reading that took a really hard look at the Jewish-Christian schism that especially started happening after Constantine, and why that happened and how that happened. But I think you guys will appreciate this, that my father's view of Jesus has evolved as well. It's taken different shape, but at one point, it must have been about 10 years in, that he said, one of the things that we did is we recommend books or treatises to each other. And he read a lot of C.S. Lewis. He'd read some the New Testament a few times. He's read a bunch of good stuff. He's read some of Tom Wright's stuff, and he said, I think that Jesus was a prophet, a true prophet in the spirit of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Malachi. I also think that he was the tzaddik, which is like the great rabbi of his time. And he goes, I think he was a Messiah candidate, but he was a failed candidate. So that's interesting. He's thought about it, and he's come to these conclusions, and he assigned these labels, and that's cool. Great rabbi, prophet, Messiah candidate. And then we revisited the conversation a couple of years later, and he goes, I still think all those things, and I still think that he was a failed Messiah candidate, but I don't think the failure was his. I think the failure was the failure of the people of Israel of his generation. How interesting is that, right?
You're like right there.
That
guys.
sounds so close. Wow, that sounds like Paul.
Right?
So close. And Peter. That sounds like Peter in Acts,
Yeah. I mean, it's so nuanced. It's so, if you really think about it.
Is he still alive, your father?
Yeah. He just he's about to turn 75. So still driving me crazy a little bit. Still, they're really good at Jewish guilt. I mean, if there were like a dojo for Jewish guilt, my mother would be a 5th degree black belt. I'm telling you, man.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah.
So just transitioning just a bit. So you obviously, like we mentioned earlier, you have a podcast called Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other.
Right.
And so talk to us about that process, like thinking about how that started and the kind of vision that you had when getting that started, and then how that vision has either stayed the same or changed over time as it's grown and continued.
Yeah. So I often relate it to those conversations I was having with my dad right after I became a Christian, those 2 or 3 years in the early 2000s. And that we needed to learn how to have these tough conversations, not just, and we say without killing each other offhandedly, but it's really more about giving each other the grace, giving each other the oxygen and the space, and with the hope of edifying each other and nurturing and enriching those relationships, through our differences, across our differences, right? But, part of it was also inside the church. I realized very early on, a really good friend of mine who was our main pastor at the first church that we went to for the better part of a decade, very, very conservative theologically and socially and politically. And pastor's oldest son, who's now a teacher at Fuller, was a missionary at the time, in Europe at the time. And he was starting to read some of the Anabaptist theologians, and it was starting to come. It was when I think we were already in Afghanistan. America was already in Afghanistan, and we're building up to the Iraq War. So he had some of these nonviolent resistance theologians rattling around in his brain,
like early 2000s.
Yeah. So Pastor Tom, his dad asked him to give an update on what's happening in the mission field, but also to teach a lesson. This is like 1,500, 2,000 people in our church, relatively big church in our town. And Tommy gave a talk. I forget if it was 02 or early 03, but it was before we were officially in Iraq. And he never mentioned Iraq. He never mentioned politics, but he taught on Romans and piecing some things together and taking out big chunks. It wasn't like a half a verse here, a half verse there. When Tommy teaches, we read entire chapters, if not 2 or 3 chapters. So he's putting it all together. And he's I wish I could get the script of the text of his lesson that day, but it was clear that he was arriving at the imperative of nonviolence as the people of God. He might have even used the word nonviolence, but that was the last time Tommy was ever able to preach at Grace.
Wow.
It was quite a hubbub because a lot of folks just heard it. They heard it because what occurred, and I've been kicked out of a Bible study or two because I disagreed with somebody's conclusion about how we should be treating immigrants or, things like that. Yeah. A lot of I'm sure you guys see this too. American evangelicalism is widely discussed.
We've experienced it.
That the default
special
posture.
announcement episode.
Yeah, but I had this ongoing dialogue with Tommy's dad, who's passed away. But great dialogue, and we sort of made fun of it. At one point, I think it was in 04, I saw a Carrie Edwards bumper sticker on a car in the parking lot. And I went up to Pastor Tom, like, hey, Pastor Tom, did you see that Carrie Edwards? He goes, Cory, you're joking with me, but I've already received dozens of emails, basically saying, Pastor Tom, what are we going to do about this?
It's a Democrat among us. What are we going to do?
Yeah, as if we got to put him through the Matthew 18 process for like.
Exactly.
Yes. Yep. We know that.
Yeah.
We know all about that.
So that's a long, again, another long answer, but it's a long answer to your question about why is it imperative to have these conversations? We got to figure out what our real priorities are. And listen, if you come to the conclusion that your real priority is nowadays like following Donald Trump or Trumpism, or even if it's not even about the Republican Party, but that the most important thing is to hate all them Democrats, hate all them liberals, hate anybody who might have voted for a Democrat once, then okay, but let's just name it. Let's just be honest about it, right?
Right.
Then we can maybe do some work, or you can find the people that you need to be around.
And you can have a real conversation. Like you can have a real conversation. You're not wrapping it in like your religious rhetoric or your kind of like obfuscating with various things. She's like, no, this is what's important. Like we talk all the time on the show about truth and identity, and a lot of people's identity has either shifted or they've leaned more into something that they've kind of been veering towards, and they're just either unaware or not ready to be honest with themselves like that and say like, this is who I am and this is my priorities. And you can't have a real it's hard to really get past the surface stuff with somebody who is not acknowledging their priorities.
Right. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons too why I love having conversations with new people sometimes about like, hey, you can be liberal politically and conservative theologically and just watch the smoke start coming out of folks' ears like, wait, what?
Incompatible. When you say like, I'm actually politically progressive because I'm religiously conservative. Like that's my favorite when you say that.
Yeah. But just the idea that if we can relearn how to have these conversations, that's the point, man. I realized early on that there were a couple of things that were primary issues that we didn't name as primary issues. And it's the way that we are thinking of people who maybe have a different denomination than we do, or a different religion than we do, or may be voting differently than we do. The tendency was to be of the sort of culture war mindset. We're in a culture war. They're trying to kill Christmas or something. I don't know. Like there's no stinking war on, there's no war on Christmas. Like, can I just take that away from you? But like,
you
just being able
folks.
just being able to have that conversation. Like, why do you think that? Well, because they are, they don't want you to say
They.
Well, who's they? Who? Let's talk about that. So, just from a avocational standpoint, I always found myself in these conversations. Some were more fruitful than others.
Sure.
But then vocationally, I discovered the podcast medium and just fell in love with it and thought it was the perfect medium to maybe have these conversations. And while I don't get 11 million listeners or, even 1 million listeners, we do get a few listeners. So, whether it's 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, that's, I think it was Tim Keller who was saying, listen, I can't compete with Fox News. So many people who are coming to my church are spending 8, 10, 20 hours a week on Fox News.
Right.
They're coming to me, and at best, I preach, they feel better, they go home, but then they're back on Fox News. So I think that if I can have these interesting conversations with folks of all different stripes, politically, theologically, from different perspectives, but people of goodwill who come into the conversation in good faith, that's 1 hour.
Yeah.
If they're going to church, okay, but it's 1 hour that they're not listening to Dan Bongino or somebody like that. It's 1 hour that they're not listening to even Tucker Carlson saying, hey, they really did steal the election, and the insurrection didn't really happen. It was like Black Lives Matter in disguises,
right,
whatever.
Yep. Which a lot of people believe.
So it's just one conversation that we're offering up on a weekly basis that I hope is more edifying. Not that I'd love to have a conversation with somebody, and I have friends who still really, really believe the election was stolen. I have friends who consider themselves strong evangelicals that, I got to have hard conversations with them. Like, dude, are you reading your Bible? You just read from the first verse of Leviticus and made an anti-immigration case. You got to read the rest of the chapter, dude. Can we have that conversation? Let's have that. If you say you're a Christian, prioritize the Bible. Let's have the conversation about not just a little half of a verse that suits your a priori preference, but let's really dig into it. And frankly, a lot of times I'll come out with, at the very least, a more nuanced understanding of the position that I was coming into the conversation with. So just as I'd like to, I think I have some strong opinions and strongly founded in Scripture, which is my deference, my primary authority. But there's a lot of times where I'm like, oh man, well, that's tough. I got to reckon with that,
Yeah.
So just as much as you want to, maybe if we're talking about persuasion, just as much as you might want to persuade somebody, it means that you got to be open to being persuaded.
That's right.
So
on that note, being open to being persuaded, I'd love to hear about some of you got a decently deep library. You're creeping up on 100, right?
Yeah, we're getting there. I think we're about to do 78 or 79.
Yeah. Nice. So, I'd love to hear, and I'm sure our listeners would be interested too. Like, when it's kind of fun when people find us, like here at the Substance, because we're almost at 100 as well. And I've had people ask, like, what should I listen to first? So I'd love to get some episode recommendations for you. But have any of the conversations you've had on your show really stand out to you as like that conversation was a catalyst for either small or large change, kind of in your perspective?
I don't know if change is the right word for it, but eye-opening, new information, really revealing about my own ignorance. Just in this last month, I got to speak with a lady named Lisa Sharon Harper, whose new book, she's written a few other books, but her new one, it just came out, is called Fortune, which is a reference to one of her ancestors' names. And the subtitle is How Race Broke My Family and the World and How to Repair It All. And I loved how she told the story. It's about the history of race in America. She actually goes further back. She goes to papal decrees and even to the time of Aristotle.
Yep.
But she traces mostly with the history of race in America. But she did so much research on her own family. So she can place her own ancestors, actually has the information on it, or at least can place them in a time and a place where certain laws were being passed, or even pre-United States, even pre-1776. In Virginia, the colony of Virginia, I forget the governing body, the name of the governing body, but they were passing certain decrees that basically institutionalized racism, or slavery. by race. So I learned so much in reading her book, and it was a great way for her to do history by personalizing it in that way, by doing the research on her own family. She has both Native American as well as African American roots, and it was just really eye opening. I did another one here recently, Matthew Lewis. So I had not read a ton of conservative philosophers, but reading Matthew Lewis's book, he writes for Daily Beast, and he has in his 2016 book, Too Dumb to Fail, which I think is a great title. He does a good chunk in the beginning of the book, tracing back conservative thought to like Burkean philosophy. And he also goes back to Aristotle, but Burkean philosophy, William F. Buckley, some of the great thinkers of the conservative movement. And it opened my eyes to, oh wow. So I'm really learning now that there's a gaping divide between the thinking of folks like William F. Buckley or a lot of folks, not so coincidentally, who are now identified as rhinos or never Trumpers. There's philosophical substratum for conservative thought. So that one was eye opening, and there've been a ton of fun ones. I think of it as a series, but I do try to bring on really good journalists, really good reporters.
And I love that. I love those episodes that I've listened to that have had those folks on.
Thank you, because there's really good work being done. It's too easy for us to simply think that, oh, well, the mainstream media, they're all liberals, they're all this, there's some really good reporting being done out there.
And we miss it, like when we're in our social media, we're looking at tweets, we're looking at Instagram, a lot of the
go find data
substantive
and research
stuff is passing us because we're like in this attention deficit cycle.
Yeah. So everyone is a thrill, man. I still get nervous before every interview because every single one of them, even folks that aren't as high profile, we had this fella on who has another podcast called Youth Ministry Maverick, and he was a pleasure to talk to, knowing that, folks maybe that don't have as big of a platform, but are the work that they're doing, that he's doing in junior high ministries, is just, if not more important than someone who has a listenership or readership of 1 million. So I every one of them, thank goodness, well, every one of them with the exception of one, I look at as just an absolute thrill, and I've learned so much from, and has so.
Well, on or off air, I'd love to hear about that too. when you throw that out there.
Yeah.
That's a tease. It's called a tease. So that's for your subscription audience. That's for the
there you go.
Yeah.
Hit us up on Cash App if you want the answer to that one.
There you go. So
I did want to ask really quickly, because you were talking about having a conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really been lost, because I think we, especially with like YouTube culture and 24-hour news cycles, if you want to call that news, it's just shouting matches.
Mm-hmm.
People just want to yell at each other or have that one thing to say that shuts down the entire conversation.
Right.
Just talk to us really quickly about the importance of having the conversation rather than the argument.
Right. So a couple conversations come to mind where that I was grateful for the nature of the conversation that we were in, as opposed to what you're describing. One was with a guy named Joe Walsh, the former congressman who came in with the Tea Party wave. And a lot of folks know some of the more controversial things he said. He subsequently, after Congress, had this big national radio show and stuff, and said some really controversial things.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot about his own evolution in thinking and how, what he sees as the most important issues of the day. But I wanted to get to a point in the conversation where we found issues that we disagreed upon. And immigration and guns, right? Or gun regulation were two things that I knew, kind of big topics. We have disagreements. We probably vote differently. But here's the thing. Once we talked about the thinking or our priorities, the ethics that we have that inform how we might vote on specific legislation that comes up around guns and immigration, we realize that we believe a lot of the same things, but we just arrive at different conclusions on specific legislation. Not only that, it's once you dig into what the actual legislation is, there's probably more opportunities to do work in common cause, and that's what grieves me about where Congress is today, is that the more radical voices in Congress are dominating the conversation. So the work that Tip O'Neill did with Ronald Reagan, or the work that Newt Gingrich did with Bill Clinton, it's almost impossible for that kind of work to be done nowadays.
Yeah.
So, whether it's on controversial issues like abortion or gun regulation, I think once you dig into, number one, the priorities that inform how you might vote on it, as well as the actual regulations or legislation that can be passed that can address everyone's priorities. I'm not saying it's a end all be all and you get everything done with one piece of legislation, but I think that somebody like AOC and I, we probably defer on when life began. I'm a, life starts at conception guy, but if we really talk about it, I bet that me and AOC value life, of the mother, value life of children outside of the womb, value life. And she, I'm sure that there's overlap there and we could find some common cause there. You know what I mean? So it's just having that conversation. And the key is to not immediately to not take one data point and then immediately make all these other assumptions about that person.
Yes.
Joe could have taken, or I was in another conversation where I was on the other side of it, these gals who are very, very progressive in their thinking. And she was making a case for why something less than nonviolent resistance was necessary when it came to like the protests after the killing of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And so that was our point of disagreement. It's like, no, we got to turn over some tables and we got to, break some glass and as I said before, I'm a nonviolent resistance guy. So she goes, let me gently posit. I love that phrase because she, and in doing so, she gave me some literature to consider why there were others who preceded, say, Dr. King, or others who preceded Gandhi in India, who allowed them to be nonviolent resistance, pinnacles of nonviolent resistance. So I think those conversations where we allow each other's humanity, where we allow each other's individuality, and we don't automatically assume, oh, well, you're in favor of legislation about regulating guns, so you must be a commie, Marxist, liberal, Nazi, child killer, baby, whatever. Like, no, I just happen to be against this particular piece of legislation. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's this mindset we got to get out of, like overly generalizing, overly simplifying, dehumanizing, and vilifying folks who disagree with us on one particular thing.
Right.
I think dehumanizing is huge. Like you can, you brought up the culture war earlier. That's a tactic. That's a warfare tactic. Dehumanize the enemy. So like your tactics can become more extreme so that you can win.
Yeah.
Well, and you can justify ever increasing flagrant forms of disingenuous engagement, whether violent or not. You can justify it because, well, these people aren't worth it. Yeah.
Well, that I mean, if you think about folks who stormed the Capitol, they felt justified in doing so.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of, they still do. There's a bunch of folks who genuinely thought that the election was stolen, it was fraudulent, that there was a war on our way of life. And that's the thing that I think I do have friends who are still very strongly supportive of Trump and believe a lot of this stuff that we're talking about. And what I understand is that, and everybody's different, but a couple of folks that I know well enough to have had these conversations, they genuinely feel that in some way their way of life is under attack.
Yeah.
And a figure like Donald Trump, as obnoxious and all the very opposite of the fruit of the spirit as he exhibits with every utterance and every breath that he takes, he's fighting for us is
Sure.
the understanding. And I get it. I don't agree, but if that's the mindset, I get it. Right.
Sure.
But it goes back to everything else we're talking about, to be in relationship with folks and to begin to at least understand and stay in the relationship with them and stay in the conversation with them.
Yeah.
You know, and if they're right, I want to know, man, because I want to get on that train. I
Sure.
don't think they are, and because of that, I'd like them to get off of that train.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but
Well, and the means matter, right? Because the other thing too is there's so much fear laden in all of that, you know?
Man.
And
Yes.
and okay, well, we need strength to fight all this. And I get it from a certain craven self-preservation standpoint, survival of the fittest standpoint. But where I don't get it is where we believe that we have a savior who, to your point earlier, conquered death and is coming back to set up a righteous kingdom, and all our hope is in him. And so we have nothing to be afraid of because we can be a faithful witness to him, even if it means that we become an enemy of the state like he did, because we helped people that the state didn't want us to help. And at the end of it, we could lose everything and still gain the world, because to live is Christ and to die is gain. So we have this perspective on Jesus. We would think that would mean that we didn't need to be afraid and need some hero to come bully other people for us.
yeah, and that's the thing. I think when we line that up and we look at the testimony, the life of Jesus, you know, his path to victory was through the cross.
Right.
His path to victory was not through the Roman army or the sword. His path to victory was through the cross. It was a very upside down victory.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
so that would look very alien, if you will, to a lot of folks who are, I think, hijacking the word of God, who are hijacking at least some of the language of it and some of the symbols of it. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot of things we brought up that's like,
Yeah.
it seems like there's a whole other conversation to be had there.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, because I've been thinking a lot about, like, today in America, it almost seems like there is no conservatism. You know, you brought up earlier people with Burkean philosophy and William F. Buckley and stuff. You know, folks who were conservative thinkers, and it almost feels like you look around today, and I mean, you've got some pro-life Democrats who are maybe have some like actual ideals, you know,
yeah,
that things are going back to, that could be something of a basis for conservatism in some way, you know.
yeah.
I would wonder your thoughts, you know, with these great conversations you're having with folks. What is the hope, I guess, for conservatism in America currently?
I've asked a lot of guys that very question, from Bill Kristol to Charlie Sykes to Matt Lewis to great scholars, men, women, different people from different races, and you know, just all different perspectives who consider themselves conservatives. I haven't. I think we're still dizzied by the chaos of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I have my own thoughts on it, that it might get worse before it gets better.
Hmm.
But I also have some hope. Maybe this is just rose-colored glasses, but I think there are folks toward the center of the Democratic Party and then the center of the general, you know, horizon, and more generally speaking, like centrists like West Virginia, Joe Manchin, or Spamberger, Congresswoman in Virginia, or I think there might be some place, whether it's a third party, which will take at least a decade for it to happen. But I do think that the degree to which the extremists and the radicals that are currently using the name Republican and using the name Democrat, those are actually the minority. And I think more and more
Hmm.
people are realizing that what they actually have in common is the level of illiberalism that is a regular feature
Yeah.
of the extremists and the screamers,
Yeah.
as we call them.
Authoritarianism, yeah, is like kind of popular on both sides.
But
Yeah.
there's a silent majority of us, vast majority of us, that, like I said, I think we can find common cause. So, you know, even my more liberal progressive friends, if they read the stuff of Irving Kristol, if they read the stuff of watched some of the debates and interviews with William F. Buckley,
Mhm.
or just some good philosophy, I think it's meaty enough to chew on. And again, is there some common cause? And I think there's a lot more common cause there than there is than we're given the impression of what's getting clicks and what folks are watching.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, it just gets tired,
Right.
and we want something more human, more beautiful, more just something more.
And that actually gives us hope. Like the culture war, you talked about like being afraid or defeating like the either fear of an enemy or trying to defeat an enemy can only take you so far as a society. Like we're not actually engaged in warfare. Like Lord willing, that'll never
Yeah.
come to that. Like
Yeah.
us fighting each other on the street about politics. So like at some point, as a society, like we need to have a common enough vision
Yeah.
for benefits so that we can raise our children, so that we can have businesses, so that we can continue, so that our kids
Yeah.
can eat.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
and my thing with that and my worry with that is that the systems that need to be changed so that we can have substantive conversation at the highest levels of government, you could think of a number of different things. I think the way that we vote and have the two-party system, and the entire way that people are getting primaried because they're not loyal to Trump right now, like that's a broken system. The balance of power stuff, the money and lobbying and all that kind of stuff, the gerrymandering and the redistricting, which I was listening to your episode with Ron and Steslow, I think is his name.
Oh yeah, great
And
one.
That's a
we're
good
talking
one.
about how redistricting is just a fundamentally partisan process. And my thought is like, well, it shouldn't be.
Right.
There's mathematically a way that you can minimize for partisanship, and that should be the correct way to redistrict, right?
Everybody should agree on that.
Yeah. So, with GIS technology, there should be a way to do that. And so I think about all these systems and the actual changing of the rules so that we could get to the place where we have a fair dialogue would be considered a pretty radically progressive agenda. And that's my concern. For a party to really have enough power in our current system to get the system to a place where we could have a productive dialogue, they would have to have all the power to do whatever in the heck they wanted to do, and then willingly divulge all that power.
But if you think of it though, the democratization of media and pretty much everything else, it can be a bad thing because you can get these actors that are bad actors and say just dumb, terrible stuff that causes all kinds of harm, like the Sandy Hook shooting didn't happen, for example.
Sure, yeah.
But because of the democratization of media, you have guys like Ron Steslow, who I think is doing great work and really shining a light on the dangerous position that democracy is in right now.
Yeah.
And he's not the only one.
Yeah.
The folks at the Dispatch are doing great work.
Yeah.
Even Pete Dominick, he comes from a definitely more liberal, progressive perspective, but he has such smart people, such informed people on there to talk about any number of issues. So I think collectively, a lot of these independent, whether it's independent individuals or independent media outlets, are there's this collective voice of like, no, we want sanity and we want something that we understand is good and we want to recapture it as good.
Yeah, I'm hoping and praying for that.
Yeah.
We're getting towards the end here. You brought it up earlier, your relationship with Ravi Zacharias and his ministry and his family, and highly recommend listeners. One of the most enjoyable episodes I've listened to recently was the one with Russ Moore.
Yeah.
You brought that up a little bit with him, like very briefly talk about like the depths of those relationships. And if you're comfortable, I'd just love to kind of hear like how you're processing and coping with the last couple of years.
Well, a couple of the conversations we've had on air, it's only a tip of the iceberg of conversations I've had off air. So there was one that we recorded with my friend Tommy, actually, Tommy Givens, who I mentioned before, and with Amy Laura Hall, who's a professor at Duke Divinity School. And we talked about heroes, when our heroes fall. That was a helpful conversation for me, just to think about the idea of having heroes.
Sure.
But there was something that Dr. Moore said that stuck with me, that we're Christians, but we're not Christ. We're Jesus followers, but we're not Jesus. He didn't put it necessarily that way, but what he did say is that we were talking about scripture. There was certain scripture that I came to a whole new understanding of because of my relationship with Ravi. And he said, that whole thing about with gentleness and respect, make a ready defense for the hope that's within you, but with gentleness, and it ends with gentleness. He said, that's no less true. Ravi's failings don't make that any less true. Don't make scripture any less true. The word is greater than any of the individuals, even the individuals who believe in the authority of the word, right? So I don't know. That's been helpful for me, but I'm still. It's some days are better than others, man. It's a really good question. And
you said you got in with his family, like you're pretty close with some of his kids. You said,
yeah, Sarah in particular. I haven't talked to her in a while, and I hope it's not because of. I feel like I need to give them all space, but
yeah.
But Sarah was out here for a while. She was working for Pepperdine, so when she was out here, we hung out a bunch and saw them at various functions. And Naomi had Wellspring, and I was very involved with her organization. So, but I haven't spoken to them since their dad died. And I hope they know that I love them. That it must be so hard. It must be so excruciating because they can't even mourn the death of their father in a way.
On such a public, I couldn't imagine that.
So really quickly, because I have a couple of personal friends who were international students for a while, and then they continue living in the States, and they're Christians, and they really gleaned to the wisdom and teachings of Ravi. And as everything kind of came out, it's quite devastating, and obviously it probably hits your heart way deeper than the person who's just consuming the content, but it still hurts, I mean, for that person. So what would be your encouragement, it's especially on the good days? Like, what would be your encouragement to those who did really cling to those teachings, and then obviously saw the unfolding of the controversy? What would be your encouragement to them to just continue on in the faith, as well as just coping with the reality of what happened?
Well, again, I think Dr. Moore put it so well, where he said our own personal failings or Ravi's personal failings. Listen, we still have to reckon with it because there are victims. There are so many victims that are really, really hurt by it. But that doesn't make the word any less true.
Sure.
That doesn't. In the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. Ravi wasn't God. Ravi wasn't the word. But also, I just think about myself, man. Like, I'm culpable. Sin in Genesis 3, sin entered the world. And I'm in it and a part of it. So, but so all of us. I'm not trying to equate my failings and proclivities with what Ravi did, but like, look, man, that's the work. We're also participating in God's redemption project. So just as much as our failings are a part of the problem and we're culpable in the problem, we're also God's still writing this story. Jesus hadn't come back yet, So after Genesis 3, the rest of the story is about how God's forming a people. God's forming the people of God. And then when Jesus came, the people of God around the person of Jesus. And it's a redemption project. So we get to participate in that. And the failings don't stop. I mean, they didn't stop before Jesus when, the people of Israel wandering the desert, like they heard the voice of God. Yeah. And then he right away built a freaking golden calf,
it's true.
Here's your God.
You just heard the voice of God, and they just went and built a gold, and then after Jesus, have you all read Acts? They all weren't perfect pictures of prudence and love, joy, and peace and patience. Like it was gnarly, man.
Yeah.
So let's just, you know what, man? Like, we all got to reckon with individual, not just Ravi, but there's any number of people who've committed egregious sins and have done great harm to others. And we just have to ask God for discernment in terms of what we take from there, what we need to re-examine. Like my buddy Tommy, his dissertation when he got his PhD, he was in interaction with John Howard Yoder. Came out after John Howard Yoder died that he was into all kinds of nasty stuff, sexual abuse and all kinds of nasty stuff. So we all have to reckon with, to what degree was the theology that I found profound, was it wrapped up directly in that sin, or what still makes sense? So we got to ask God for our own discernment, you know? So I don't know what the answer is, man. Like, other people have had better answers than I have. I'm still struggling with it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I appreciate that, though.
That's honest, man.
That's real, and I think that's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, shout outs.
We're going from that to shout outs.
Yeah.
Maybe like think about the Nets or something, or rock and roll, or I don't know.
Sometimes, yeah.
Closer.
Yeah. All right. This is for Kansas and Missouri listeners only. Everybody else, 30 seconds forward. I got a message for you guys from Chris Hotchkiss, American Family Insurance. Introducing the damage doesn't have to be too damaging policy. Even though we don't know what life has in store for homes or cars, we can still prepare. Insure carefully, dream fearlessly. Contact Chris at 913-268-8200. American Mutual Insurance Company, SI, and its operation company, 6000 American Parkway, Madison, Wisconsin.
Guys, got any final thoughts?
Man, I feel like this is such a great conversation. I could ask a ton of different.
No, we could easily go another 2 hours.
Very easily.
Let's give it a whirl. Now, actually, believe it or not, I have a meeting after this. I'm on the HR committee for our church, so yeah, I got a meeting I got to go to.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll hit shout outs. Cory, we appreciate your time here tonight. One of the things we like to do towards the end here, before we get to hear you kind of pitch your show and plugs and all that, is do substance shout outs. Where, what have you been listening to, reading, watching, intaking, movies, shows, books, podcasts, articles? What have you found engaging or edifying that you'd like to maybe recommend that audience go and check out?
Well, one I mentioned already, it was a really profound book. It made a huge impact on me, and that's Lisa Sharon Harper's book, Fortune: How Race Broke My Family and the World and How to Repair It All. I found that just really enlightening and hard to grapple with our history, our shared history. But a piece, I think that it is a piece of a bigger puzzle of redeeming us, redeeming who we are here today in this country, you know. In addition to, I think it's a lot of her theological work is interwoven there too. So Lisa Sharon Harper, I just started listening to, I don't know how new it is, but this is kind of,
it doesn't have to be new.
Okay.
Just something good.
So I grew up a couple towns away from Blues Traveler, where those guys started. If you ever heard John Popper, he's a great harmonica player. So I've been listening to Traveler's Blues, and it's like their tribute to great blues musicians and great blues music. And it's really fun. I like that one. But I don't know. A lot of the stuff I read is like, some of my favorite writers is David Brooks, David French, all the Davids.
Love David French.
Yeah.
Have you had David French on your show?
That would be a dream come true, man. I would love to have him on. I've been hitting him up, like, because we had Curtis.
I like it.
Yeah, that was a great conversation. We had, we've had so many people that he knows. Dan Darling we had on the program. We had Sarah Isger, his partner in crime at the Dispatch, and they do advisory opinions. If you want to nerd out, like, even if you're not a law student, but just really nerd out on what's going on at the Supreme Court level and important cases around the country, David and Sarah's podcast, Advisory Opinions, is just fantastic. I've learned so much.
For sure.
Nice.
So,
yeah. So we've had a lot of his partners, but we're trying to hopefully get him at some point.
I like it. That's nice and diverse. We got a book on race, blues music, and a policy podcast.
There you go.
I like it.
Yeah.
Cory, where would you like folks to look for you online?
Obviously, wait, y'all didn't give your own shout outs. Do you have shout outs?
We do shout outs when we do
solo episodes, because we're not always a guest show.
If Cory's kicking it to us, do you want to recommend anything to Cory, Vince, or Trev?
The shout out I have in my head is not substantive at all.
It doesn't have to be terribly substantive.
Sure. So this might be a subject that we get into when we have a topic toss up. But for whatever reason, a lot of people were really, really surprised that a lot of Black people enjoyed anime for years. And so two individuals that really brought that to life. One was RDC World. They do sketch comedy. And it's not always anime, but they have these like series where they do Anime House or Cartoon House or anything like that. And they really brought to life because they have like 5 million viewers or whatever on YouTube. So they really brought to life like how deep Black people really get into anime. And then another one, a YouTuber, Caleb City, he's got about 3 to 5 million viewers as well on his, or subscribers on his YouTube. And he also does sketch comedy, and he brings that to life, as well as just like really practical stuff that is just like he executes it in a comedic way that's almost just like he doesn't miss. Every single video he releases is just so hilarious. So those guys are all on YouTube. And like I said, I'd love to dive deeper into that as to how Black people really got, or the Black community really got into anime, because there's a context to that. But that would be a shout out that I would have is Caleb City and RDC.
Nice, dude.
Awesome.
Trev?
I mean,
you weren't prepared for this. You got anything?
I was not prepared, but I'll just give you off the top of the dome. I discovered Pyrex Picasso 2021 hip hop EP by Benny the Butcher this last couple days. And sometimes I just have a day where I'm like, I'm gonna listen to some rap. The world is broken and needs Jesus to fix it, and it's not going to get fixed anytime soon. So I'm going to listen to some hip hop because these people get it.
I'm so glad. I've been recommending hip hop to Trevor for like 30, like not 30 years, like not when I was a baby, but like our whole life. Like I've known Trevor my entire life. So over 30 years I've known Trevor, and ever since I got in, I've been trying to get him to listen to it. And I love that the last few years it's really taken root.
Sticking now.
Mine also, I was like, well, what have I been? I already hit Sam Fuller. I'll maybe do some more movies later, but I've been listening to not a whole lot of new music lately that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's plenty of cool new music, but with 2 kids, a job, and a podcast, I hardly listen to any of it. But Earl Sweatshirt's new album, Sick, I have really, really enjoyed. He's kind of been, the last few projects of his, he's become a master of like the short song. Like sometimes they're like oddly short. They're like 1 or 2 verse songs, but he's like a poet and a rapper, but it hits hard. 2010, I think, is his standout track, but it's Sick, ! Is a real cool little album. It's like a 20-minute album.
Wow.
Dope.
So anime and hip hop from the substance off the top. That's what we've been. That's what we've been into, guys. So, Cory, where can folks find you? What do you want them to look at? We'll put the podcast link in the show notes, but website, social media, other projects.
Yeah, the easiest way to find us is the website politicsandreligion.us. Politics and with the A and D spelled out, politicsandreligion.us. And we're on all the socials. In fact, I am not, well, I was going to say I'm cool now, but I'm not cool at all. But we're even on TikTok now. I set up a TikTok account yesterday.
All right.
Now so
on the CCP is aware of you.
Yeah. On all the socials, I'm hashtagging like crazy.
Politicsandreligion.us?
Politicsandreligion.us. But we're on all the socials, including TikTok,
Nice.
Twitter, and
getting
Facebook.
All those 12-year-olds interested in policy.
Yeah, that's right.
You got to do a dance, though, I think, is how you get on it, right?
Well, you can't mess up the cha-cha. I might have like...
TikTok is very diverse, Trev. There's all sorts of TikToks out
Could you imagine if I got Dr. Moore back and we just did the cha-cha?
Good chance of going viral.
On all those, we're at TP&R pod. TP&R pod.
Nice.
That's our go-to. So
Excellent. Well, we'll throw that in the show notes and maybe link some of the episodes specifically you recommended here. And if you guys are interested in hearing more, go check that out.
Thank you so much. It's been really great getting to know y'all better and just hanging out with you. So thanks for doing this.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for coming on and sharing your story. It's been a pleasure for sure. All right, have a great evening, Phil. Man, I feel like you did a lot of the legwork on the connect with Cory Nathan, our guest today, and man, what an enjoyable conversation. Thank you, man.
That was a blast, man.
Yeah, thanks so much.
I enjoyed it a lot. Shout out to Emily Matthews on the TP&R team for connecting us. That was a lot of fun.
Super fun.
Thoughtful guy. Dude, I had a physiological, emotional reaction hearing his conversion story. Like, we gotta do more of those when it's appropriate.
Testimonies
That was awesome.
are so much fun. Yeah, and
We gotta
Like, the
have
whole
him
New
back.
Testament, and then it's like, well, yeah, Jesus is the Messiah. Like, that was special.
Mm-hmm.
I got
Absolutely.
I got the Shylin song stuck in my head. Jesus is alive.
Sure. Well, yeah, like, and not that it's not more special when a Jewish person becomes saved, but like that they
It's not
are
insignificant.
in a way the chosen people and special to God in a way. Like, when God's people, when Israel like connects those dots and sees Jesus as the fulfillment of their whole identity, like, it's such a beautiful thing.
Romans
It really
11,
is, yeah.
man, it's special to the heart of God and it's part of His plan. So check it out. We're a
I love that.
dispensational podcast. Get over it.
Well, if people are rocking, I love the people who are rocking with us. Like, if you are still here and listening to the end of this episode, I don't even know what is all going to make this. Like, thank you. Like, this is why we do this.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
We're probably pretty out there as far as like a specific set of the amount of people who actually agree with our very like specific set of beliefs that like pretty much all three of us share is like probably pretty small, actually.
But also shout out
But
to
who
the folks
cares?
who are like
it doesn't matter.
75% or even like 60% with us. And
Or 10% there
thing.
and like listening, you know, like just
Yeah, I know my
coming in
pastor is
every
like
week.
super covenantal, so he'd be like, dispensational what?
Usually like
But he listens to it
fine.
anyway, so
We're gonna
he's
spend eternity together. We
Yeah.
can listen to each other's podcasts when it makes sense.
I mean, not to mention 1,000 years in the millennial kingdom of Christ. So
That's very good. That should, if that doesn't make that should absolutely make the B-roll. I think you should leave that in at the end bumper there for the folks who stick around. That's very good. Okay, guys, try to wrap this up quickly here. If you like the substance, I'm gonna do this with them laughing. This is totally fine. Leave it in if you like. If you like the substance, if it brings enjoyment or value to your week, if it's something you look forward to and enjoy, consider partnering with us on Anchor. That's where you can sign up for either $5 or $10 a month. We got some at $5 and some at $10, and we love you all. And if you're not able to do monthly support, you can jump on Cash App. That is our method of choice, and you can shoot us whatever makes sense to you as often as you like. We actually had for a while, I don't think we've gotten that in a little while, for a while every month, instead of signing up on Anchor, we had listeners just sending us $10 a month on Cash App. So, I mean, you do you, whatever makes sense for your budget and way of life. And on Cash App, that is $ the Substance Pod.
Yeah, and visit us at www.thesubstancepod.com. There you will be able to see our socials in the upper right corner of the home page. And there we are also The Substance Pod. You'll also be able to listen to our episodes there. And on YouTube, our comment section is disabled, but on the website, our comment section is live and ready to receive your comments. So please click on an episode that you like or that you've enjoyed or that you've listened to, and put your comments under there, what you thought, what you enjoyed, what you didn't like or enjoy, and just let us know, and we'd love to engage with you on thesubstancepod.com.
You can send your 10-page single-spaced defense of amillennialism email to thesubstancepod@gmail.com.
I do not give a guarantee that I will read that. I'll read your other ones.
And we'll look forward to interacting with that on a topic toss-up. Or
2022, guys.
Because it is 2022, that means that it is, in fact, the year of the voicemail. So feel free to leave your thoughts, feelings, emotions about anything in this episode, including our comments on the Millennial Reign of Christ at 913-703-3883. And
give us a call.
Yeah.
If you can do it 60 seconds, that would be ideal.
I mean, 2-3 minutes is fine.
Under
too.
2 minutes.
Yeah. It's all, I mean, it's the year of voicemail, so you just do what you got to do.
So this was the substance.
Man, this is the substance right here. You're here.
Substance.
You're listening to it. You can keep listening to it. We got 80-something, 90-something episodes by the time you're listening to this, probably. So enjoy it.
Road to 100.
Listen to that back catalog. We thank you for stopping by. Share it with your friends. Give us the 5 stars. I'm one of your 3 hosts, Trevor Aiken.
And I'm Philip.
And I'm Vincent.
And we all are very excited to have you back next time
on The Substance.
We gone.
When I continued my Jewish education, see, I told you, I warned you in advance that Charles Mingus III would be piping up during this interview.
No worries.
So yeah.